Hello, welcome to episode of the Bubbs Talking Baseball podcast. I'm your host, Bubbs, also known as Blair, or Blair, also known as Bubbs, whatever you want to call me. We're here today with a special guest, Max Goodman. He's a beat reporter for the New York Yankees. I really appreciate you coming on. Max, how's it going, man?
It's good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yep, doing good. Looking forward to getting into all things Yankees and talking about the season so far. So I wanted to start off with kind of just your overall thoughts so far on how the season has went. The Yankees right now are 75 games in. They're 7 games up on 500 at 41-34, coming off the series win to open up the 6-game homestand against Seattle. Though last night was one you want to forget about. But just kind of your thoughts. It's been an up and down year with the injuries. Judge most recently going down. It was a rough April, good May, now a rough June. Where do you feel the Yankees stand currently, and just your overall thoughts on the season 3 months in as we get closer to more than midway or more than halfway, but closer to the All-Star break?
Sure. I mean, we're right up against the literal midway point, as much as the All-Star
Mm-hmm.
break comes a little after 81 games in. I think you
Yeah.
said it, that it was an up and down start. I think that you're looking at a
Mm-hmm.
team that's a sub 500 fringe playoff team when they don't
Yeah.
have Aaron Judge and they're missing all of these other guys on the injured list. It seems like every year now the injury ravaged Yankees is the narrative. And can they withstand this? Are they going to be healthy at the right time leading into the playoffs? That's been the story every single year.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't know when Judge is going to be back, as much as Boone said yesterday that he's going to start his baseball activities potentially by the end of this week. I'll believe it when I see it. This
Yeah.
isn't something that they want to rush with him. And I think that we're seeing potentially the repercussions of a devastating right big toe injury and right foot
Yeah.
injury with DJ LeMahieu. And that really the end of his season last year deteriorated, and that injury derailed everything for him, an aging player. That's the last thing you want with Judge, a power guy. Having your back foot not under you at the plate would be devastating for someone like that. So yeah, just sticking to big picture, I think that this team still has a chance to do some serious damage in the playoffs. And I
Mm-hmm.
keep saying on these kind of interviews that you look at what the Phillies did last year, all it
Yeah.
takes is a ticket to the dance, and you never know what's going to happen. I think
Mm-hmm.
that this team at full strength on paper is one of the best in baseball. Certainly with the pitching staff, if Carlos Rodon turns out to
Yeah.
be an ace, if Nestor Cortez bounces back, if Luis Severino was healthy and figures things out, you can't really find a better four-man start to a rotation. You thought Frankie Montas might be in there too starting the season,
Yeah.
but that's probably out the window as well. And the offense, they're the Bronx Bombers for a reason. Their payroll is so high. They have so many big boppers in that lineup, but a lot of veterans are struggling right now, which is a glaring concern. Some of the youngsters haven't really put it together yet. We'll see
Mm-hmm.
what the second half holds for Anthony Volpe. So plenty of storylines to keep an eye on. The good thing for them is that they're in it, as much as the division is ruthless, and they're X games over 500, even with the injuries and the underperformance
Yeah.
and struggles. So it could certainly be a lot worse, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is what Brian Cashman, Hal Steinbrenner, everyone envisioned
Yeah.
necessarily. But it is a long season. That's the beauty of 162.
Yeah, definitely. And you made some great points, obviously, with, especially with the veterans struggling right now. It's tough because you want Rizzo, you want Stanton. LeMahieu's just had a really rough year. And you mentioned with the toe. I mean, I don't know if that's still affecting him, if it's just old age at this point, but it's just from a guy that was so good just 2 years ago from the injuries and the foot and stuff like that. It's been rough to just watch him kind of on a slow decline. But, looking at the veterans that they've been struggling a little bit and seeing that again, they're not playing well right now. Despite winning the series, they're not playing well like they were with Judge when they took 2 or 3 in LA. And, at that point they were playing their best baseball of the season. Do you feel like there's a sense of urgency in a way in this locker room right now? Or do you feel it's kind of like, what, just keep our head above water, play 500 baseball once Judge comes back? Obviously Bader just got back. You have Rodon coming back. Like, once those things start to fall in place, we'll get back to the team that they were in the month of May.
I think it's a mix of the two. I don't know if you'll find a team in baseball that is more confident in
Yep.
what's in the clubhouse, despite
Yeah.
sometimes a pretty grotesque product. Um,
Mm-hmm.
every day we're in the clubhouse, and even after some really, really bad losses, there's, Boone defending his players, guys in the clubhouse standing up for their teammates and saying it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. What Steinbrenner and Cashman have said in recent weeks shows that they are trying to just weather this storm, and they
Yeah.
believe in this group. Whether that's short-sighted, we won't know until they either win a World Series or don't, because that
Mhm.
is the threshold for this team. Like, the expectation is that they will win. They haven't been back to a World Series since '09, so I think that the frustration from the fan base is certainly warranted, and I think that it's tough because they put so much money in, and just a lot of these moves haven't worked. You can't make the argument that the Yankees aren't trying. It's just that they haven't
Mhm.
made a lot of the right decisions over the last few years, and some of those you kind of have to just stick with them unless you want to eat tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
They've already made that decision with Aaron Hicks. It's not as easy as just cutting Josh Donaldson. I mean, they made that
Mhm.
trade with the Gary Sanchez IKF deal. You kind of have to make the most of it, or at
Yeah.
least give him a little bit of a runway. That's what Cashman said the other day. As much as he's not producing, so the on the flip side, yesterday LeMahieu threw his helmet in the dugout. You see
Yeah.
guys starting to look a little frustrated. You see some somber press conferences, and we haven't had the Aaron Boone smacking the table just
Yeah.
yet. Like, I think they haven't reached a boiling point necessarily.
Mhm.
It is so early in the year, and they are still, in the playoffs and above 500, so they're winning games. But man, I mean, you look at the offense. As soon as the Mariners scored 4 in the first yesterday and 6 in the first 2 innings, they haven't scored 6 runs. They've done it once since Aaron Judge got hurt. So you're basically thinking, okay, this game's over, and that says a lot when you're
Yeah.
watching the team with the second highest payroll in the league, the Yankees. It's just very uncharacteristic. So I think that, Yes Network, I'll wrap up with this. Yes Network showed some guys in the dugout like
Yeah.
midway through the game yesterday, and they all looked so forlorn and defeated. Like, that says a lot, as much as they
Yeah.
are still claiming that they have faith in this group. I think it's a mix of the two.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the Yes Network clip there too. There was just a lot of just kind of just blank face, like just faces staring into just the distance, just not doing anything. So it does seem like frustration is definitely starting to pile up, as you mentioned. I want to just quickly ask a follow up on Donaldson. Cashman had mentioned the other day, they got to give him like you mentioned, like a runway. He's got to continue to just try and get hot. Hopefully, he can try and find his groove. I mean, I'm personally as a baseball fan, many other Yankee fans as well, like myself. I would rather see Peraza up. Do you see there's any chance that if this continues into, let's say, late July and he's still hitting the way he's hitting, is there any chance you see them either move on or move him to the bench and call up a Peraza, somebody that's obviously dominating at AAA and had success last year? Got very minimal plate appearances this season, but last season had success batting over 300 in the opportunity he got.
I think you have to, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's a 37-year-old who is evidently past his prime, and that wasn't the reason why they made that trade 2 springs ago, was to get IKF because they wanted a shortstop, a
Yeah.
placeholder there until Volpe was ready. Maybe that hasn't worked out. Now he's a two-way superstar, so I guess it did. Um, just kidding, of course. But
Mhm.
you know, the deeper you look at Donaldson's season, there are some signs of encouragement, and that's not what Yankees want to hear. Yankees fans want to
Yeah.
hear. I think that's where this he's going to be okay. We're going to stick with him comes from, because in 2021 he was great with the Twins. Really productive offensive season, hitting the ball really hard. He's showing a little bit of that this year, and did miss a really long time with the injury. So in a normal sense, you would give a player like that some time to try to figure things out, get the timing back, and he's hit some home runs, right? So you can't necessarily
Mhm.
put him in the same category as Stanton, who's had an even worse average, who hasn't been hitting home runs, and Rizzo since the neck injury thing with Tatis at the end of last month.
Yeah.
He hasn't been the same player either. LeMahieu as well. So I get it to a certain extent, but with how much he's making, and like you said, with the fact that Peraza is killing it in AAA, you make the same argument with Volpe, and it justifies sending someone like that down when there's a better
Mhm.
performer that's deserving a call up just one call away. So I think it's telling that Peraza is starting to play a little more third base and work on that at AAA. I don't think there's anyone else that could necessarily usurp him and be a third base call up option. If anything, it would just be internal guys. If you were to move on from Donaldson, you'd see
Yep.
IKF, Oswaldo, and LeMahieu play there, because then that would let Glaber stay at second more often. That was the narrative going into this
Yeah.
season too, right? The logjam of infielders that they have. It's been good that they've had injuries, because then it's easier to make the lineup, but that's not
Yeah.
ever really a good thing. So I agree. If he continues to hit low hundreds for
Yeah.
another several weeks, you gotta make a move. I don't see how the Yankees could be comfortable continuing with him, but being an unbiased reporter and trying to find both sides of the story, like, I kind of get why they're sticking with him, because he is
Mhm.
a really good defender as well, as much as the error last night is an aberration and
Yeah.
really bad look. So I get it. I don't know if you're on the same page with me there. I think that some of the StatCast numbers are encouraging, but the product and the results are certainly not.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I would personally like to, see Peraza up. That's just me, but I definitely get where you're coming from too with, he has hit some balls hard. I mean, you go back to the Dodgers series where he hit the 2 homers, but again, but as you mentioned, like, he is 37. He's not the same player he once was. My thing is just like, how much longer can they wait until they see or finally hope to see results? Because if this just continues, as you mentioned, like if this continues into July, I mean, you hope that somebody else would be able to come up like a Peraza and produce at a higher level. So that's what I wanted to lead into. Like my next point is, accountability has been something that's been talked about a lot with this Yankee kind of front office group of guys that they've got with Cashman, Howland, and obviously Boone. Do you feel at times Boone maybe lacks a little bit of accountability, like with some of the errors in the field or with some of these poor hitting, still penciling some of these guys back into the lineup every day, despite some of their poor play? Or is that just kind of the way he is, and that's probably not gonna change?
I think that you're seeing the reason why the players love to play for Boone, because he's a player's manager. And so he's going to go out there in front of, you know, some of the toughest media in
Yeah,
baseball. That's what New York media is. And he's going to defend his guys. Speaking about Herman last night, who had the worst start of his career,
yeah,
Boone led with saying that he thought that it was coming out hot early on, and then he just started to make a couple mistakes. It's easy for us to say, oh, Boone should have said, yeah, he was awful. He looked
hmm,
terrible. And I wish he didn't pitch. But he would never say that about his guy, whether he's
yeah,
thinking or not. And I don't think that you would see that from other managers either, unless they're really getting to a tipping point in the season where they're letting some frustration go. He has criticized guys. I
yeah,
just, you could make a case that Torres should have been benched after the thing on the base paths. He's had some mental
yeah,
lapse. You could
hmm,
make a case that Stanton shouldn't be in there because he's been really terrible as well in
yeah,
terms of the result. But maybe they're just in a part of the season where they're trying to just take a positive approach to these kind of things, especially because Judge is out. So they're running out of options. And they want these guys to just continue to get to play so that hopefully they catch fire eventually and it becomes contagious. So Boone is in a tough spot, and he has been for a couple of years, right? I know a
yeah,
lot of fans don't like him, but he has dealt with some serious adversity in terms of his roster. It's not his responsibility to make trades and choose who get called up a lot of the time. He's working with what he has. So not to completely defend him here, because I think that the blame with not getting to a World Series or winning one falls on everybody involved. But
yeah,
it's on him to work with what he has. And when the Yankees are leading the league in injuries, whose fault is that? Is it the training staff? Well, they just overhauled the training staff, and some of these injuries are flukes. So is it the players'
yeah,
fault? Some of them are flukes. Some of these players are aging. The Yankees typically have an older roster because they're paying for players in free agency. It's not always young guys coming up like it would be in a smaller market. So it's top to bottom, right? Should
yeah,
Steinbrenner have put in more money? He put in quite a bit of money. Should Brian Cashman have made different moves? He made quite a bit of moves. So maybe it's just a perfect storm in the worst way right now. But I think that you're going to see Boone stand up for his guys no matter what until the very end. And he was a player, right? So he knows what it's like to go through the dark times. He's gonna
yeah,
he's gonna find a positive swing with pretty much everything. But if the season continues to deteriorate, I think you'll see him start to get more frustrated. You'll see his tone change when he's talking to us, and you'll see his comments start to not get angry, but you'll start
Yeah.
to notice it more often. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. And as you mentioned early on, maybe you see that table slam like in July if this continues like he had last year. But yeah, you're spot on. I mean, it goes from top to bottom. And, again, there's blame, as you mentioned, to go around. Hal and Cashman kind of put this thing together. Boone's got to work with what he's got. I go even across town with the Mets, where they've had obviously a brutal season and there's blame to go all around there. But, some people question Buck Showalter and his management, but he can only work with what he's got. I mean, you look at that bullpen with the Mets, it's horrible. They're rolling out AAA arms. So some people blaming Buck for some of the bullpen decisions. That's not all of his fault because he's got to go with what he's got in there. That's just what Epler and Steve Cohen provided him. So same thing here with Boone too. Like they've provided him with this team, and without Judge, it's rough. And as you mentioned, some of these injuries, I mean, Judge making a great play. It just so happens he nails his foot right into the wall. It's unfortunate. Stanton, his injury was stopping going into second base for a double. Like it's fluky, like you mentioned. So, but as you also said too about Herman last night struggling a little bit, I wanted to get into the rotation, which is, Garrett Cole's been great, and something we all love about Cole is every 5 days he's going to be out there, he's going to be available, and he's going to put you in a spot to win. Even if he doesn't have his best stuff, even if he goes out there and doesn't give you, maybe the best length in the world or 7-8 innings, he's going to give you a chance to win. But I wanted to talk about Herman and Sevy a little bit. Sevy's really struggled recently. Herman, obviously, the last 2 outings. I guess we'll start with Herman last night. Again, as you mentioned, Boone kind of said that, he felt like his stuff was good, but his curveball was missing a little bit. And you saw that too in Boston. Is that just the last 2 outings have been rough? Do you feel it? Do they feel it's more something mechanic stuff? What's kind of going with Herman here, who was really good and now his last 2 starts lost it a little bit?
Yeah, I either you're seeing a player regress to the reality here, or it is just a couple starts where he just didn't have
Yeah.
it. But when you give up 17 runs in 5 1/3 innings or
Yeah.
whatever it is, I don't know how much you can say, oh, well, he should be fine. Because these aren't offenses that are,
Yeah.
juggernauts either. Like
Very
the Red
true.
Sox are last place team, as much as it's a good division. The Mariners have been underperforming this year as well. So when Colton Wong is hitting a tape measure shot off you and it's his first homer of the year, like there were
Yeah.
some glaring concerns in how he pitched. So does it have to do with the sticky stuff thing? Because that changed the trajectory of his season. I don't know. That's a big, accusation to make. So that's not something I want to say. But he had a 2.20 ERA for 7
Yep.
starts, beginning of May to early June. I think I wrote something that he was one of the best pitchers in the league in that point.
Yep.
And Cole was not good in May. So Herman was
Mm-hmm.
their best pitcher. And all of a sudden you're thinking, wow, well, maybe he can help them get to the end of the year. And him and Clark Schmidt are taking a huge step forward this season. That's great. Now, Herman won 18 games a couple years ago. Maybe
Yep.
this is what they're going to get from him the rest of the year. But that's why what Cole does every season and what the Aces do is so impressive, because to sustain that and make adjustments on the fly and stay healthy and bring your best out there every 5 days, it's hard to do.
Yep.
So I'm not sure what they're going to get from Herman the rest of the way, but I guess the good thing is that he entered the year as a competing guy for your number 5 spot. So if all things go according to plan, as I said earlier, if you have Cole, Rodon, Severino, and Cortez, then you don't really need Herman when it matters most. You could have him as a bulk guy in the bullpen, I guess.
Yep.
But to get to that point, you need him to continue to produce, unless you're going to roll with Burrito and Vasquez and some other guys from AAA who have been great as well. I mean, this whole pitching staff has been a next man up
Yep.
masterpiece this year, but I don't sense that they're going to take Herman out of the rotation automatically, right? It's only been 2 starts. You got to give him some credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm sure that Matt Blake was up early this morning trying to see if he was tipping, to see if he's making mechanical mistakes. So maybe I'll dive back into a little bit more. But when you're leaving pitchers over the plate in the majors, it doesn't matter if you're facing the Rays or the A's. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I feel like I still kind of believe that he can get back to where he was, because I mean, that Dodgers game, you go back to that on, I believe it was a Sunday night baseball game to close out that series. I mean, he was phenomenal. And the only mistake he made was, his last inning with the JD Martinez, I believe it was the JD Martinez homer where he hung a curveball, but that was like a great outing. And then to, as you mentioned, like 17 runs, it's ugly. So now we go to Sevy where I'm just kind of confused because this was a guy that his first two outings was so good against the Reds and it got even better against San Diego. And now over June, he's got a 9.16 ERA. And his last four starts have been brutal, to say the least. I mean, the one against the Red Sox, the other three were much worse. But what do they feel is the issue with Sevy here, where unlike Herman, it's been four starts. It's been basically this entire month of struggles for Sevy, and they've been pretty bad.
You're worrying about a pitcher that doesn't seem like he's healthy, doesn't seem like he's right, because
Mhm.
the healthy and at his best version of Severino is an ace. I mean, you saw
Yep.
that at the very beginning of his career, and he hasn't been able to get back to that point because of injuries. It's been a really long and ugly stretch for him. Tommy John, shoulder stuff, the lat strain this spring, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if he's completely right. I mean, the velocity was a narrative earlier this month, and I think that he's kind of it's ticked up back to normal to a certain extent, but it's hard. I mean, he missed a lot of time, and
Mhm.
maybe other teams were able to really digest his first two starts. One of them was against the Reds before the Reds really started to get hot, and he didn't pitch
Yep.
as many innings as he is right now. So maybe that's a correlation. But again, they need him to be his best if they want to get to the promised land at the end. So maybe that's a situation where if you're, and this is just speculating of maybe something that I would do, you give him a couple starts off, you let him kind of take a reset and maybe save
Mhm.
some bullets for later on, because the last thing you want is for him to overcompensate and start to make mistakes in his
Yeah.
mechanics, or compensate is the word, or getting to a point mentally where he's trying to do too much and then he gets
Yep.
hurt and he's out for the rest of the year, or he's out for another month. That's not what you want. So if anyone's accountable in that clubhouse, it's Severino and Stanton. They are very
Yep.
candid about their
Mhm.
performances, which we appreciate as reporters, because some guys beat around the bush, and others are um, they don't want to talk about that kind of stuff. But Severino has said, it's unacceptable, that it's not okay what he's been doing. So you appreciate that, but fans are only going to be grateful for those kind of comments for so long. They want to see
Yep.
him produce. So I think that they have a lot of trust and faith in Severino because of his track record. But if he doesn't get back to that point soon, then you worry, who's starting game 3 of a wild card series, because Cortez hasn't been himself
Yep.
either this year. Maybe that's a regression to the pitcher that Nestor truly is. I mean, 2 seasons of him being an all-star caliber pitcher has been great. So is that the Cortez that they're going to have moving
Yeah.
forward? Or is it the Cortez that was DFA'd 3 times, was a 34th round pick? You just don't know. So same thing with
Yeah.
Severino. Is it the ace, or is it the guy who's always rehabbing and trying to figure out how to get deep into games because he's been hurt for much of this season?
Yeah, definitely. You just hope that you get the better end of him. And as you mentioned, like he does hold himself accountable. And that's one thing I'll say, as you said, both Stanton and Sevy, they both, Stanton will stand up there. I mean, I remember going back a little bit when his first game at Yankee Stadium, when he struck out 4 times, I think it was, he stood up there in front of the microphones and kind of jokingly made fun of himself a little bit about, striking out for 4 times and stuff. And he hasn't put together the season he's wanted to so far, but yeah, I totally agree with the Sevy stuff, and even the little bit of Stanton there as well. I wanted to get to the bullpen too, and we can get back to some of the position players. Clay Holmes has, he's kind of been, had a little bit of an up and down first start to the season, and then recently, I mean, I go back to that Mets game where they won 7-6. I mean, he comes in, bases loaded, strikes out Lindor, strikes out Marte. He's been great, recently, and a guy that's really looked a whole lot like Clay Holmes when we brought him over at the deadline.
Absolutely. He's been one of the best closers in the league, one of the best, hybrid late inning guys, because I know they've
Mhm.
used a bunch of different closers. I mean, you can say that about the entire bullpen, right? There's a reason
Yeah.
why they have the best bullpen ERA, lowest opponent's batting average against relievers this season. Whoever Boone has thrown out there has produced, other
Yep.
than Albert Abreu. I think that there haven't
Mhm.
been too many guys who have a high
Yeah.
ERA, basically. So you can take what Holmes has done and go the positive route. He's figured it out. His sinker is
Yep.
great. He's mixing in that sweeper slider, and that combination is deadly. You have him, and you don't need to trade for a closer, because that was,
Mhm.
if you remember what he did, and speaking of Herman, the almost shutout at the very beginning of May, I think that was against the Guardians. And
Mhm.
Boone comes in, takes him
Yeah.
out with 2 outs to go, and then Holmes blows the game. And then it's like, okay, that's it. We've had enough with Clay. He's not going
Yeah.
to be that pitcher anymore. But since then, he's been unreal. Or you take the other route, and Holmes was even better last year in the first half. And
Yep.
then you saw him totally turn a corner and be a middle inning guy like he was with the Pirates, and give up
Mhm.
homers, and the command wasn't there. The
Yeah.
sinker wasn't a bowling ball anymore. So as much as that's a narrative with so many players, because it is such a long season, you don't know what's going to happen down the road. It's hard to just trust that he's going to be Mariano Rivera caliber for the rest of the
Yeah.
season, because that's what he's been. But again, they need him to be that pitcher, because this bullpen has been so taxed early on this year. As much as the rotation has had its moments, the bullpen has been used a lot. And the last thing the Yankees need is for that one reliability and that one unwavering strength to start to falter late in the year, because they need it in the playoffs more than ever, because starters don't go 8 innings in October. That's
Yep.
very rare at this point. So I think that he's been great, and I think that he will continue to be great, but you have to temper your expectations a little bit. I don't know if he's going to go 19 of 20 outings without giving up a run for extended periods. But if he's just a couple ticks below that in terms of quality, the Yankees would take that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's been something that, I think been one issue with him, as you said, is like the inconsistency a little bit. And you look at the deadline, and earlier this month you looked at it, maybe a Doval from San Francisco could have been an option, but now they just, although they got their win streak snapped the other day, but they 10-game win streak, so you wonder if they would to sell. But or sell at the deadline. I still don't. I still wouldn't mind bringing another arm to just to have, like another closer type player, just to have, just in case if Clay Holmes does go on that stretch where he struggles and doesn't look good, especially if it comes postseason time. But you got to enjoy it now, because he's been great. He's been one of the better closers in baseball over this past month, especially with some of these high leverage situations that he's been in, like against the Mets was one of the bigger ones that over this past week or so. So yeah, the bullpen's been great. And quickly, I just want to get the thought, or your update on Ian Hamilton. I believe he's with Somerset now. What is kind of the plan for him moving forward? Another guy, didn't expect him to make much of an impact going into this year, but was really good prior to injury.
Yeah, quite frankly, I should have mentioned him as the quintessential Yankee bullpen arm this year, because I mean, he was a non-roster guy, such a
Yep.
turbulent past, and now he's
Yeah.
been in that group of high leverage guys for them. So I think he has one more rehab appearance in Somerset. I think it's weather permitting, because I'm not sure how this weekend's going to look down
Yep.
there. It's certainly ugly outside today. Um, and then I think he's good. It was a 4-week window with his groin strain. We're already past 5 weeks, so he's right up against when he should be back. Not to say that there was a setback, but I think they just slow played it a little bit. That's obviously a sensitive area for a pitcher.
Mhm.
So if he comes back and he is the Ian Hamilton of early on, Tommy Kahnle has been so great, and
Yep.
you can't forget about Jonathan Loaizaga either, who is
Yeah.
a wild card, because when he's right, and we saw that a couple of years ago, he could be one of the best relievers in the league as well. But
Yep.
last year was a huge step back, and a shoulder injury or an elbow injury, an arm injury is certainly concerning with any hard throwing reliever. So you need your depth pieces to eat up innings throughout the rest of this season. Shout out to Nick Ramirez for a
Yeah.
magical outing last night to just get them through that game and not waste some arms for the Rangers series starting tonight. But Hamilton has turned into a huge and important piece for them, and I think that if he and Kahnle are great, you mix that with Michael King. Wandy Peralta is unstoppable against lefties and always comes up big in big spots. Clay Holmes, Loaizaga. I mean, that's a pretty solid group. If all those guys are healthy, you may not need another arm, but the Yankees
Yep.
obviously have shown a propensity to going out and getting relievers no matter what at the deadline. I think that the Scott Efros trade was out of nowhere last year.
Yeah.
He would be a factor here if he wasn't hurt. Lou Trevino could have saved the Montas trade, but he's not available either. And Tommy John is like, you can't control those things. That's not the fault of the Yankees for trading guys. That's not necessarily them being injury prone, whereas Montas is more on that side of the coin.
Yeah.
So the potential is there for them to not need to trade for anybody, but I would not be surprised at all if they went out and traded for a rental arm. The Yankees just churn out pitching talent within their organization.
Yeah.
So there are some expendable, low-level minor leaguers that they could use in that kind of deal.
Yeah, totally. Matt Blake's just turned into, I mean, as we mentioned, like Clay Holmes is a perfect example of that. Just somebody that with his analytical approach and the way he does things, he turns these guys into like middle inning guys, like you said, to high leverage guys that are big in big spots. So, yeah, the bullpen's been a big surprise this year, considering going into the season, it was kind of, a little rocky with all the injuries that took place, and especially some of our, the better guys like Canely, who we were all looking forward to seeing back, and he's been great too. So I want to move on here. Even one of the positives to take from all these injuries is also some of these guys that have been able to step up, and that's been Billy McKinney and Jake Bauers, who have been two really good guys in the outfield. Defensively, Billy McKinney, I thought's been good defensively. Jake Bauers, has made some plays, but maybe not as defensively strong as, comparing them to Bader and Judge is a little unfair, but two guys that have hit very well. And, Billy McKinney's been a really surprising guy that's just come up throughout the minors and has spent a little bit of time throughout his career, spent some time with the Yankees, and he spent some time with the Mets, have kind of been all over. So your thoughts on those two guys getting called up and have provided, have been one of the positives to what has been, a rough stretch for the offense.
Definitely, man, those guys have overperformed, I think, beyond what the Yankees would have expected, as much as they were playing really well in AAA. I think you can put Willie Calhoun in that category as well, as maybe his numbers are a little bit below those two. So that's a little bit of a blow, him going on the injured list for probably the next month. I wonder if the Yankees if these guys continue to produce at this rate, which obviously you're not sure if that's possible, but it just continues to happen. So let's say that it does. They continue to be productive corner outfielders the rest of the way. Maybe that, I mean, if you have an opportunity to get a proven starting left fielder at the deadline, which is what they did with Benintendi last year, they were hesitant to make that move this past offseason. If a deal presents itself that you could get somebody like that, I don't think they should hesitate, but maybe they err on the side of caution in a sense, because they have these guys that are producing and they've been above average left fielders if you put those two players together. As much as that's kind of crazy and nobody figured that would happen, as much as these guys are non-roster invitees who are struggling to revive their careers, they were fits at Yankee Stadium. They've worked really well with the hitting coaches, and they're playing hard, and they're providing a spark for a team that's been, lifeless at times since Judge went down. So it's funny to think of the statement, where would the Yankees be without Billy McKinney? But that's kind of where they're at right now. And good for him too, because he's a great guy. Bauers, they've been through a lot. Calhoun been through even more, and they're making it happen on the biggest stage. I guess the veterans who are struggling might need to channel some of that fire, and I'm sure that there's some batted ball luck, and they're making it happen. But when McKinney's hitting homers to the bleachers over the short porch and right, and Bauers is producing, I mean, it's remarkable to see. It's really unprecedented, and you root for guys like that because of what they've been through. I don't know how sustainable it is, but the Yankees are going to ride it as long as they can, for sure.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's just, again, the stories too are really cool, and you hope that like some of these veterans that are struggling, as you said, like, can try and bring some of that energy to that Billy McKinney. I mean, he actually had a shot to the bleachers as well. It wasn't just like a porch shot, which is we've seen a lot of, and some of the guys that called up, you just hope that they can maybe sneak one of those in and get, a 2-run shot and make it a game. But yeah, they've been really good. And as you talked about earlier, IKF too, he's like the Shohei Ohtani, hitting homers and pitching. I guess, look, his numbers on the year haven't been, very good, but he's a guy that, he's handled this situation very well. He lost the job last year. He kind of knew what was going to happen, but he obviously lost his shortstop job, and now he's been everywhere. I mean, he's a guy that, is just wherever they want him, he's out there. He's pitching. He's hitting homers a little bit, which I think he has more homers probably than he had all of last year, which doesn't mean a lot because he's not a power. He's not a power hitter, so you don't expect that. But it is a nice bonus. But your thoughts on IKF kind of being able to do a little bit of everything, and now this year in the outfield as well?
You said it. I mean, he's everything the Yankees have asked him to do. He's done it, and he's excelled at it. I think that he's turned himself into a really plus utility man, kind of like what Oswaldo did at the end of last season. I mean,
Yeah,
IKF never played in the outfield, or at least it hadn't happened since he was in the low levels of the minors, and he wasn't an outfielder at that point. But this is a guy who played catcher to get to the big leagues when he was with the
yeah,
Rangers. He's been all over the infield, a Gold Glover at third, as much as that was the pandemic shortened season. And maybe some of his routes aren't great. Maybe he doesn't have the best arm, but he has turned into an above average defender out there, a guy that Boone can put in all three of those positions at any point, helping out when Judge has been out, Bader has been out. I mean, if those two stay healthy, you probably don't see IKF in the outfield as much. But offensively, too, like you said, I mean, showing some pop, but also getting the little things done. And he talks about that pretty much every
yeah,
single time that he's on with us in a post-game presser. You go up to him individually. He knows that this team needs to score runs in different ways because their MVP, the guy who hit 62 homers last year, isn't there to bail them out.
yeah,
So you're going to see him go the other way. You're going to see him lay a bunt down. He's going to get the guy over. He's turned into a really valuable piece for them. As much as like you hinted at earlier, there was a case to completely take him off the roster when he wasn't going
yeah,
to be the shortstop because it just didn't work out with him. And he has taken that in stride. It can't be easy for someone who dreamt of being a Yankee
yeah,
shortstop. He has that opportunity. It does not go well. He's benched at the end of last season in the playoffs. Sees these two youngsters that are more highly touted, have more potential than he ever did as a prospect. That can't be easy, but he has really blossomed in his role. And you joke about the Ohtani stuff, right? But
yeah,
hey, I mean, he's valuable in that sense too. Like he
yeah,
pitched an inning and he pitched well last night to avoid having Boone need to use another reliever. So if he continues to produce, I think that you'll see him playing almost on a daily basis. He's not going to necessarily start a lot, but
yeah.
you can see him having an impact in the playoffs, coming off the bench and pinch running and hitting in late spots because he puts the ball in play. And that's what he does.
Yeah, totally. And as you mentioned, I mean, he's a career like 260, 270 guy. He's gonna get runners in, and he's again not gonna be very. He's not gonna have all these big hits with all his big exit velo, but he gets the job done, and that's at the end of the day all that matters. And we've seen Boone too utilize a lot where, like late in games, we've seen when Calhoun was healthy, he'd take Willie Calhoun out and like move out IKF out there for the defensive
Yep.
replacement to get the better defense for the final 2-3 innings if Calhoun probably wasn't going to get another at bat. So that's been something that's been really valuable too, and something that Boone has definitely utilized. But I want to talk about too another guy here to kind of close things out, and that's Volpe. And again, had an excellent spring training, had a pretty good start to the season. It was stealing bases a lot, and then was drawing some walks, was doing good, and then he started to struggle and really struggled. Like got in this deep slump, and then now he's starting to seems like turn a little bit of a corner. He made an adjustment in his swing. I think the one day he was back and talking to Austin Wells, who was his teammate last year, and they made some adjustments, and it seems like he was got more of a closed stance now than where he was. And it's worked. Again, it's a small sample size, but going back to that Mets, those two games against the Mets, it's started to work a little bit. You're seeing, some better contact. I mean, I believe he's like third on the team in homer, so he's provided some pop, some power. Defensively, I think he's been fine. Your thoughts on Volpe so far, and just every day going out there. You gotta, as a fan, I've just kind of trained myself to just gotta go with the good days and go with the good days. You gotta be happy, and the bad days is just all part of the learning process. And the Yankees and Hal Steinbrenner, something I do agree with them with doing this is you got to keep them up here. I don't think they should send them down. Keep them up here. Just get them the reps, get them the opportunities. There's going to be growing pains, but I think it's just going to be better for his future.
Quite frankly, we could have an hour-long podcast just on Volpe's season
Yeah,
and his future because it is such a talking point this year. the highs have been very high, right? I mean, he's
Yeah.
got 10 homers, 15 steals, hasn't been caught stealing yet. He's on pace to have a pretty historic rookie season for the, you know, most illustrious franchise in baseball, right? Like
Yeah.
what he's doing hasn't been replicated by many other Yankee rookies, and he's living up to his potential in that sense. But then you see the month by month splits for him, and his season is rapidly deteriorating as much as the last couple of days maybe have been in the right direction. Overall, I'm
Yeah.
saying June has been his worst month. I think
Yeah.
still is. And there have been some lapses on defense, as much as a lot of them have been called hits. The scoring this year
Yeah.
by
It's not good.
by the league is touch and go. But I think that his defensive numbers are worse than they say in terms of the 7 errors or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like the advanced metrics aren't necessarily
Mhm.
kind to him. So what Boone always keeps saying is that he makes a lot of winning plays, and he does. And I agree with you in large part because that's the decision they made, and it would do a lot to his confidence in the wrong way, I think, if you send him down. But it's just more magnified when the rest of the lineup is also playing poorly
Yeah.
and he continues to go out there and abandon his approach. It looks like I didn't watch him in the minors every day, so I don't know if that swing change or stance change is going to take him back to the way he was, because he was really good in the minors.
Yeah.
Obviously, facing big league pitching is another animal, though. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I play fantasy baseball, and I reached on him in the draft. I'm in a 12-person league, so shortstop is a commodity, and I think this is
Yeah.
relevant because I'm not a fan of the team, but I think fans of the team are trusting that he's going to be okay. And I think, based on how highly touted he is, that he could still have a decade plus long career as the Yankees
Yeah.
shortstop or being up the middle. But in the confines of just this season and the way things have gone so far, it's not good.
Yeah.
As much as there has been that weekly flash of potential and the big hits late in games and the big diving plays, the overall sustained product has not been what the Yankees were hoping it would be. But it's a 22-year-old, a guy that's going to take his time to develop. There have been many other players who are highly touted that struggle and either go
Mhm.
down or just need that first year to figure things out, and then they end up being MVPs and all-stars and Hall of Famers. So I don't think there's any reason to panic. But again, just looking at this season alone, I mean, he's fallen back to the number 9 spot in the order,
Yeah.
a lot of offers, some very unproductive days. So it's a lot of give and take. And like I said, you could talk about this for an hour because he's an important piece for them. They made a
Yeah.
big decision by calling him up and not signing another shortstop these last couple of years. They could have had Corey Seager, they could have had
Yeah.
Carlos Correa, as much as he hasn't been great this year.
Mhm.
They've had Dansby Swanson, the list goes on and on, Trey Turner. But they trusted this guy. So the organization believes in him through thick and through thin, and that's why they're not sending him down. Because I think that in other situations, like with what the Cardinals did with Walker, what the
Yeah.
Orioles did with their pitcher Grayson Rodriguez, I think is his name. Um, that there's a case to be made to sending him down to try and figure things out. So it's even more magnified when you're in pinstripes playing shortstop. It's Jeter's position, and
Yeah.
that's what he's always dreamt of doing. And it's got to be hard for him to not produce, but he seems to have that sixth tool of maturity and working well and handling that adversity. And I think we'll be okay. It's just a long season, and if it continues to be a downward slope, it's going to get even tougher and tougher to justify rolling with him when, like we talked about earlier, Peraza has been really good in AAA, and he's knocking on the door.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more with what you had to say there. I mean, you were spot on with all that. And again, he only had what 20 games in AAA or whatever it was last year. So, this is it is just a learning curve for him. I would like to see him work more walks. At the beginning part of the season, he was working walks and he was getting on, and that was such a threat on the bases. I mean, you saw what he could do. Not even just, he doesn't even have to steal, just having that in the back of the pitcher's mind. I mean, going all the way back, this is going way back to the opening day series. I believe he got on first, and I don't even think he stole, but I think the Giants pitcher, whoever was on the mound at the time, I think threw like three. He walked the next guy or whatever. He was throwing balls. He was like spiking pitches, and it was like you could tell Volpe got in his head. I believe it was one of those series, but so I would like to see him do more of that. as you mentioned, he's had some big spots, like, he's had the walk-offs and stuff like that. So do you see, though, in the future, again, who knows what Glaber's future is going to be? And Glaber's been one of the constants this year for the Yankees. He's been a little inconsistent, but recently he's been pretty good. Do you see in the future potentially it probably being Peraza at short and Volpe moving back over to second, or how do you see that end up playing out? Maybe 2 years from now, 2-3 years down the road.
I think that that's the best case scenario if
Yeah,
both of those two pan out and reach their potential. Um, Seeing Glaber's name involved in trade rumors at last summer's deadline, I think tells you a lot about the Yankees trying to get some value for him as he inches closer and closer to free agency. Because I think he's going to hit the open market after next season, so he's
yeah,
not the baby bomber hitting 36 home runs as a sophomore anymore. I mean, this is a guy that's taken steps back. He's not the player that he was early
yeah,
on. As much as he's kind of started to go back on the rise in his career, maybe playing a little better at second base this year, I think has been uh, quite a few mental lapses there
yeah,
and liability at
definitely.
times. But like you alluded to, I mean, he's been one of their most productive hitters this season. And I think that says a lot to the way the Yankees have played as a whole. But if there's a deadline deal to get a starting pitcher for him, let's say like what that Pablo Lopez trade would have been
Yeah,
last summer, do you make that trade when the fans love him and he's been a productive piece for you on offense? You make that trade, you promote Peraza, and Peraza wasn't great in the big leagues to begin this year. I mean, then you're risking that it doesn't work out with those two guys, and then you're completely tied to them because
yeah.
LeMahieu was the veteran and he hasn't been the same either this year. He's not like he's going to play short. So
Hmm.
it's very interesting to consider what's going to happen with him. I can certainly see him just living out the rest of his contract and then maybe signing somewhere else. But if the Yankees were to find a situation where they could get something in return and maybe bolster another part of their roster, second base, it's hard to find a power guy, right? So he is an
Yep.
offensive upside piece at second. I think a lot of, let's say, also National League clubs that would want a guy to also be at DH. He's a perfect fit in that sense. Maybe he'd be able to take some steps forward with a change of scenery as well. As much as he's not in the same category as these other veterans that have been real bad this year and really struggling. I don't think he's in the Hicks universe at all either. I mean, he's not a
Yeah.
guy that's booed day in and day
Mhm.
out. The routinely, he's hitting the ball hard and hitting the ball out of the ballpark and playing better this year. But it's just hard to see him factor in, which is something that I'm sure fans 5 years ago would not have expected because he was
Yep.
supposed to be the shortstop of the future. And it hasn't worked out like that. So sure, there's a chance that they extend him and keep him around. It's the same question with Harrison Bader, a guy who's injury prone, but when he's on, he's one of the best center fielders in the league
Yep.
and such a perfect fit for this team. So that's what they have to decide. It's tough decisions, and Glaber would make a lot of money if they brought him back and signed him on a long-term deal. So where's that money coming from? They've got it tied in a lot of different places.
Yep.
It's a big decision they've got to make. I wouldn't be surprised if they just move on to the younger guys, as much as I think some fans would be bummed to see someone like Glaber go.
Yeah, definitely. It's been an interesting kind of tenure for him, as you mentioned. Like, go back to that 2019 season. I know maybe the balls were whatever, the balls were juiced, whatever, but still, 36 home runs is 36 home runs. I mean, that's impressive, and a guy that provides a lot of pop. So they've got some decisions, definitely. Bader, who I really like, but the injuries are a concern, and especially you want just with all the injuries we've had, do you want to bring another injury prone guy back? That's, those are questions that'll be had definitely in the offseason. But one more quick question here, going back a little bit earlier on, but obviously Donaldson, Rizzo, DJ, and then Stanton have all kind of struggled. Out of those four guys, who do you see like breaking out of this slump that they're in, and who do you see getting back to, whether it's Rizzo getting back to where he was, whether it's Stanton? I mean, Stanton's barely played this year before the injury. Now he's struggled since that. So who do you see kind of regaining their form out of the four of them the quickest?
Good question. I think that, I mean, Rizzo was so good early on.
Yep.
He's been through it all. So I think that he's going to level out and start to produce again. But the real answer to that question is Stanton. As much as
Mhm.
he'll go through weeks where it's hard to watch his at bats. They're
Yeah.
really ugly. He has a weird looking swing and stance and doesn't always run out of the box. He's an easy player to not like, right? For the old fans from all around the tri-state area that are
Yeah.
traditionalists and don't like the modern age of baseball. I can see why he gets a lot of hate. But when Stanton figures it out, and it can happen all of a sudden, it could happen
Yeah.
tonight, it can happen on the road on the West Coast in Oakland. Who knows when it's going to happen? With a snap of a finger, he is all of a sudden one of the best hitters in the league. And I don't know how he
Yep.
does it. It's very unique in terms of his approach and how he figures things out. But I can totally see him going on a run. In fact, I'm a little surprised that he's hitting this low. It's
Yeah.
under 100 since Judge's injury or since he came back from the IL, or both of them too. So they need him to be that player, especially with Judge out. And he's the kind of guy that can literally carry the team, just like Judge does. So if he can get back to that point, I think he'll have one of those stretches in the not so distant future. But you're looking at a player that is on the decline overall. I mean, he's not going to
Yeah.
hit 59 home runs anymore because he doesn't play in full seasons. And that contract that they took on may come back to bite them as he
Yeah.
gets older and older, because he's in his mid 30s now. Um, but as long as you get some stretches over the course of the year where he is that dangerous bat, it helps everybody else in the lineup. It protects the guys in front of him, and it brings in runs, and it adds some juice to
Mhm.
the team. You see a guy hit a homer over the batter's eye at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
At his best, he's a Hall of Fame caliber slugger, right? I mean, you don't see
Yep.
too many guys like him that are just physical specimens and can hit the ball 500 feet on any given day. So
Yep.
in that sense, I'm kind of hoping that he gets back to it, because
Yeah.
it's so fun to watch when he is hitting those tape measure shots and these casual 118.5 mile an
Yeah.
hour screamers up the middle. But there's no happy medium, right? I mean, it's either
No, yeah,
that
it's
or he's hitting 070 for weeks at a time and whiffing at bad pitches and just walking back to the dugout, and the boos start to come. So he's not going to be phased by this bad stretch. And that's why I think that he can turn it around at the drop of a hat. But you keep waiting for it to happen. And
yeah.
like you said, he hasn't played that much. So he's not going to be in the lineup every day. I don't think
Yep.
you're going to see him in the outfield that much. They're going to ease him back into that. So it might take some time, but when it happens, think of me saying this, and that
Yeah.
he's capable of some magical things for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, as you mentioned too, like carrying the team. I mean, he's been, Judge has had very good regular seasons, but his postseason numbers last year weren't, very good. And he's struggled at times a little bit in the postseason. But Stanton's been a guy that has carried him. He kind of carried the Yankees last year during that Cleveland series. I mean, he was phenomenal. Even in Game 5, hitting that big, I believe it was 3-run shot to open up the scoring in that Game 5 to get him to the ALDS or ALCS. And then even go back to like 2021 when he carried them down the stretch to get into the playoffs, to get into the wild card game, which didn't end well. But he always seems like whenever he comes off the IL, it always seems like it takes him forever. Like it's always once the IL stint, he just comes back and it takes him forever to get back into the groove. But as you mentioned, it takes 1 or 2 swings, whatever it is with him, and he just he can go on a 2-3 week, just a 2-3 week hot stretch where he looks like one of the better just player, hitters in baseball. And he's got so much power. We saw it last year at the All-Star game when he literally looked like he dented the baseball. It's just he's got just pure force. So yeah, just hope that he can get back into the groove here while Judge is out for a little longer. But that will kind of close things out here. Really appreciate you coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you. Obviously on social media, what you're doing now with all the Yankee stuff. So tell everybody where they can find your work.
Sure. I'm on Twitter probably more than I should be, but it's at Max T Goodman. And if you want to read my articles, it's over on NJ.com. On the Yankees page, you can find my author page there as well. But yeah, man, appreciate you having me. It's a long season, so I think that there's a reason why it's been almost an hour, because there's so many things that you
Yeah.
can talk about with this team that's both exciting and concerning. So we'll see what happens. It's a big year, because I think if things don't go well for them over the next few months, you could see some significant changes, because their drought is continuing, and other teams are getting better around them in the American League. But the potential is certainly there. I think that there's a chance that they could go all the way, certainly, but a lot has to go right. So we'll see what happens.
Yep, and hopefully they continue to get healthy. And Rodon's on the way back. Judge, hopefully, as you mentioned, starting to get back into things. So get on I mean, 2 years ago they got on that big 13-game win streak. All it takes is winning 8 of 10, or here we go. Texas, win 2 of 3 here, have a 4-2 homestand, and you get 6 games against 2 teams that have been bad. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I really appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun. Obviously, it was pretty long, so got a lot to talk about, and yeah, that will close things out. So as always, hope you enjoyed it, and for those of you watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. And for those of you that listen on all the different podcast forms, appreciate all the support, and we'll see you next time.